Hi, I'm Old Norse Specialist Dr. Jackson Crawford. On this channel for many years, I have delved pretty often into Norse mythology as someone who encounters these texts as much as anyone in the world does, from a lifetime of studying their language and as a translator of those texts. And I keep encountering over the years this sense that some people apparently have that something is being hidden from them somewhere. And so this is a brief video about my sincere belief that no one is hiding more myths from you. So mostly where this comes from is someone kind of exasperatedly says, all right, well, you've talked enough about Odin or Thor or Loki. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about, to use an extreme example, Sinking? Now, I've made a video recently about that particular case. This is a name that comes to us from one line, one time in a poem in Old High German, so not even in Old Norse, but in a related language. And we can't say anything more about Sintkun. Sintkun occurs there and is said to be Sona's sister. Like, what do you want me to do? I'm a linguist. I can tell you a guess at what her name means, which oddly enough, the best guess about this seems to be that it's like ever night battle. Like, that's interesting, but and I can sit here and I can maybe put on my speculation hat. This isn't my speculation hat, but let's pretend that it is and say, okay, maybe this is deified moon or star or owl even, right? But I can't tell you that for certain. And a big part of what I always want to do is distinguish between what I'm certain about and what I'm not certain about. One of the best things about in 2019, my opportunity to make the Wanderer's Havamal with my commentary on the Old Norse text and putting the Old Norse text and the English text next to each other, was being able to explain decisions where, I couldn't tell you for absolutely certain what was going on in a stanza, but no one can. Here are a couple options, and here's the one that I think is the best. And very often that's really kind of all we can do is say, well, this is what I think is the best out of these available possible explanations for something that's just barely hinted at. Let me give you a quick message from my friends and partners, talk a little bit about my edit projects. I'll come back and talk a little bit more about this. Let me just tell you a little bit about my friends and partners at Grimfrost and about my own current projects. So first of all, if you are really into Old Norse products, including my own books or very historically accurate reproductions of Norse jewelry, such as the Thor's hammer pendants, or Norse weapons, or Norse board games, or just cool t-shirts with neat designs, sometimes done by me in runes. The people that you should turn to are the people at Grimfrost. They're good friends of mine. They helped sponsor my great trip to Sweden in 2022 when I visited and made videos about some of the most important runestones there. Check them out and let them know that I sent you. Second, let me tell you a little bit about my projects. My Wanderer's Journal, which will be a blank journal, like this, but cooler, although this one's pretty cool. My brother gave it to me. It will have quotes from Havamal in Old Norse, rendered by me in Viking Age accurate Younger Futhark, and then rendered artistically by Hackett's Liz Wilson, and then also the Cowboy Havamal translations of those. The second edition of my Poetic Edda translation will be out probably by the end of 2025. It will include some new translations, some translations of poems, including some that have never been translated into a language other than Old Norse before. And then the Prose Edda should be due probably by the end of 2026. So when we have some kind of, question mark, who is Saintgund? Who is the dwarf Thjóð Roirir, who's very briefly mentioned in Hávamál? Who is Ullr, really, right? Because, I mean, Ullr occurs in some very archaic contexts, right? He's mentioned in Grímnismál, which is one of the more archaic, as in legitimately full of pre-Christian stuff, poems in the Poetic Edda. But then we don't really hear who he is there, right? Snorri tells us a bunch of stuff about him that he, in the Prose Edda, which we always have to remember is kind of a secondary source, right? Snorri is trying to explain older poems. Can we be sure that when Snorri says, you know, he's a great skier, or even that he's called Ondr ski Asir, you know, ski god of the Asir, that really applies to Ullr, because in Skaldic poetry, the Ondrgoth, the ski god, ski deity, is Skadi. We just have to kind of sometimes say, and I have other videos about this occasionally too, like there's one that I made, a very unpopular video called When We Just Don't Know, which I'm kind of repeating some points from, but we sometimes just have to say, I don't know, right? This is something important to me, actually, is being able to say I don't know, because, you know, the purpose of this channel has never been to, you know, lead you on some lifestyle path. Nobody wants to be me when they grow up. If they do, they need to reconsider. You know, I don't have a philosophy to sell you here. I don't have a religious motive in sharing these things. I'm not a religious modern pagan. Also true. There's different words for it, heathen. You know, I just want to show you what's there in our medieval sources. And I promise you, I do my best to trace down every little bit of information that can be responsibly sourced. But I'm always going to try to make sure that it is responsibly sourced. And when I start speculating, like saying, you know, Hellblendy, that name occurring as a name of Odin and occurring as a name of Loki's brother, maybe that suggests that there's a tradition where Loki and Odin are brothers. I'm never just going to come out and say Loki and Odin are brothers, because probably that's not everybody's understanding. It doesn't seem to be Snorri's understanding. I just want to suggest that there's something back there that says maybe some people understood them as such. As long as we're understanding honestly what our sources are, what our limitations are, and etc., telling the stories of the Norse gods is always going to focus on the ones that actually have stories told about them in the Eddas, right? That's a lot of Odin, a lot of Thor, a lot of Loki, and a lot of Freyja. And then after that, there's a steep fall to the next bunch of gods where there's a lot said: Heimdallr, Tyr, Freyr, Baldur. You know, maybe there's one or two major stories about that, and there's a huge fall down to the ones that there's just no story about, but only names. You know, your Ullr, Sjalvan, if that even is. You know, at some point you have to say, if Snorri mentions her once in a list, is that even really a god or goddess, or is he misunderstanding a name that he heard one time for, like, Freyja or Frigg? I always want to leave that open. I always want you to understand where and why I have questions. And, you know, I may not be God's gift to Old Norse, but I try to be honest about what's there. So I'm not hiding any myths from you. There's no extra stories. If you ask me, you know, like, why don't you say something more about Thjóðir or Saintgund or Ullr or whatever, I haven't said more because there's not more out there. I am translating a new poem for the second edition of the Poetic Edda that's going to be out in late 2025 that, as far as I can tell, has never been translated, at least in entirety, into any language other than Old Norse. It's a little late. It's from the later 1300s, but there's reason to think that it may be based on something much older, and it does have a little bit of extra stuff there about some of the gods. But again, we're talking about, you know, Loki and Thor. Like, the ones that have known stories about them are also the ones who are likely to have sort of like less known stories about them too. They just seem to be the ones that were popular in stories. At any rate, I pledge to you, as always, to properly source my information, not to hide any information from you, and to distinguish when I'm speculating from when I'm teaching. All right. Thank you for listening to that ramble. Thank you, Patreon, for your support. Thank you to those of you buying my books. Watch for The Wanderer's Journal, a blank journal with some quotes from Hávamál and runes. Younger Food-like Runes, done up artistically by Hackett's Liz Wilson. And watch for the enhanced second edition of the Poetic Edda, probably late 2025, and my Prose Edda translation's probably looking at late 2026, but that will include Ynglinga Saga and all of the Prose Edda. All right, well, for now, from beautiful Colorado, I'm wishing you all the best.